Okay, we've got 1 minute to go. Let's see if we can get this live stream happening. Yes, it's going this time.
Good luck, everyone. I'm going to turn my camera off and I will jump back in at the question time, but it will be great.
Thank you so much, Greg.
It will be great. Okay, I am about to start the webinar. I'm going to turning off everything now myself as well. And then as soon as it clicks to 12, I will start webinar and all the attendees will.
How many minutes should I give it before I start? Welcome, everyone. We're just letting everyone through. Thank you. Noting today's session will be recorded, so hopefully we can see it once it's done. So we're just letting a few people in and I will make a start. I will let Aqua give me the green light on when they'd like that to happen too. Great stuff. So thank you so much for coming, everyone. What a lineup of guests today, and how many of you are here today is also fantastic. So a warm welcome. My name is Delia Donovan. I'm the CEO of Domestic Violence New South Wales. We represent over 200 life-saving organisations across the state. It's a real pleasure to be facilitating today's session on amplifying the voices of children and young people in family and domestic violence and coercive control practitioner strategies. This session today is on behalf of the Centre for Community Welfare Training, which I will call CCWT throughout today. But importantly, before we begin, I want to pay deep respects and acknowledgement of Aboriginal people, colleagues, organisations and communities. It is a privilege to be on Gadigal country today of the Eora Nation here in Redfern. And as part of this acknowledgement, I, as CEO of DV New South Wales, and myself, Delia, commit to active allyship, listening, learning, and reflecting on the steps I must take to truly drive meaningful and lasting change. Before we talk about today, I also want to acknowledge that it's the last day of the 16 days of activism, which runs every year from the 25th of November, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, all the way through to the 10th of December, which is today, obviously, and it's Human Rights Day. During the 16 days of activism, communities all over the world join the call to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls. This year has been incredibly important in the domestic violence space here in Australia, as DV New South Wales and the domestic violence sector turned 50. We acknowledge that we've achieved so much, yet there is still so much to do, hence why today is so important with you all, including a whole of sector and whole of government response to domestic violence. And today's event really highlights that importance of that collaboration across government and sector. And we know that that will mean better outcomes for children, young people, and the families we serve. So moving on to why we're here today. On the 1st of July this year, 2024, a new coercive control offence commenced under Part 3, Division 6A of the Crimes Act. Section 54D of the Crimes Act prescribes an offence of abusive behaviours towards a current or former intimate partner, where an adult engages in a course of conduct of abusive behaviour that is intended to coerce or control the other person. This is commonly referred to as coercive control, and we certainly know in the domestic violence space, coercive control underpins all domestic violence. Now, this offence carries is punishable for up to 7 years imprisonment. So that's something that's happened across the last 6 months. And DV New South Wales is doing some work with government now to look at what that looks like in practice. So CCWT, in partnership with DCJ, have developed coercive control training to equip New South Wales practitioners with the knowledge and skills to identify and respond to coercive control. And to date, 1,500 practitioners have attended that training, so that's super significant and important as we see that offence go live. Overwhelmingly, participants wanted more information, particularly on the impacts of domestic and family violence and coercive control on children and young people. So that feedback was taken really seriously, and this webinar is in response to that feedback. So on to today's webinar. Today's session aims to deepen our understanding of the experiences children and young people who are exposed to family and domestic violence and coercive control and what they experience. We'll explore practical strategies, which I think will be really key, to amplify their voices and support them in these challenging environments. We have incredible panelists who will bring their knowledge, insights, and expertise to diverse areas of practice and research. Before I introduce them, I do want to give a content warning. I know that we're all working in this space, but I think discussing coercive control in the context of family and domestic violence can be deeply touching and potentially distressing. If at any time you feel overwhelmed, please prioritise your well-being and leave the session, even if you need to take a break. You can reach out to 1-800-RESPECT, 1800 737 732, available 24/7. Or if you need an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander crisis supporter, you can call 13 Yarn on 13 9276, also available 24/7. I know I'm talking a lot, but you'll bear with me, everyone. I'm just going to give you the session objectives, talk about the amazing lineup, and then we'll get cracking with questions. So by the end of this session, we're hoping that you will, one, understand the unique experiences of children and young people exposed to domestic and family violence and coercive control. And like I said, that underpins domestic and family violence. Two, we're hoping that you'll recognise the importance of amplifying their voices and ensuring they are included in decision-making processes. Three, we hope you'll be equipped with strategies to safely manage meaningful work with children and young people in various contexts. Four, we hope that you'll learn about trauma-informed practices that can support the emotional and psychological well-being of children. And finally, we hope you'll be able to identify and address the challenges in hearing children's voices and explore solutions. Right, let's get cracking onto our incredible panelists. We're joined today by an incredible group of panelists who will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience. I'd like to briefly introduce each of them. Dr. Robert Urquhart is an honorary research fellow at Sydney University, Head of Knowledge, Outcomes and Research at Barnardo's, Australia. Robert is committed to helping our most vulnerable children overcome the harm of domestic and family violence and is a recent Churchill Fellow. Next, Associate Professor Tim Moore. He's the Deputy Director of the Institute of Child Protection Studies of the Australian Catholic University. Of course, the aircon's going to start making noise at this current moment. Apologies, Tim Moore. So he's the Deputy Director of the Institute of Child Protection Studies at the Australian Catholic University. For 20 years, Tim has conducted research with children and young people, including those who have experienced family and domestic violence. Next, we have Reuben Sheriff. He's the National Youth Advisor with NAPCAN, a 21-year-old Pakanya man from Nipaluna, Hobart, living in Moana country. Reuben has just finished his third year of the Bachelor of Social Work with honours at UTAS. Really excited to hear from Reuben and his experience. Finally, we have Dr. Mary Jo McPhee. And I say doctor, we'll be talking a bit about that doctorate in a bit. Mary Jo has just completed her doctorate. Mary Jo is the founder and CEO of Cara Consultancy, an expert in child protection and rights-informed intervention, a proud Belfast Irish woman and an Australian Social Worker of the Year 2019. Mary Jo has just completed her PhD on that trust factor. We'll talk more about that when we get to her questions. So there you have it. What a lineup. I'll be directing questions to each of them throughout the session, and I also encourage you to engage with us by putting any questions you have in the Q&A, which we'll have at the end. And any questions we don't get to, we'll have a Q&A resource developed at the end of this session, which will be made available to everyone. So we're going to start today by setting the stage for today's discussion, focusing on the impact of family and domestic violence and coercive control, and its impacts on children and young people. To do this, we'll hear from Dr. Robert Urquhart, Barnardo's, Australia. So Robert, huge welcome today. I understand that you recently undertook a Churchill Fellowship where you investigated international best practices for supporting children healing from the harm due to family and domestic violence. Could you share, Robert, some highlights from your experience abroad? And how do these practices compare with what's happening here in Australia?
Let me answer that in 3 parts. Firstly, the personal insights. Now, before my fellowship, I thought I'd fully resolved my own childhood experiences of family violence. As a researcher, I approached the topic with emotional detachment, or so I believed. But the trip revealed I was still holding on to a metaphorical cast, you might say, long after that healing had occurred. Letting go of that was like shedding a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. And this taught me that lived experience is a double-edged sword. It fuels passion and drive, but unresolved pain can limit how we hear and respond to others. Reflecting on this deepened my practice and reminded me of the wisdom of being a lamp unto yourself. By embodying what I once needed, I've grown both personally and professionally. Second, the professional insights. I approached every meeting with an open mind, determined to listen without preconceptions. This revealed a key learning. Healing for children requires more than addressing trauma. It's about strengthening their ecosystem. Resilience-informed systems are as vital as being trauma and DV-informed. A compelling example of that is the classic rat park experiment, where enriched environments significantly reduced destructive behaviours. Similarly, Alicia Lieberman, founder of the child-parent psychotherapy, emphasised that hope is essential for healing. This highlights the importance of creating environments that foster resilience and hope, both in practice and in policy. Third, how does this compare with Australia? I was encouraged to see how overseas experts recognise pockets of excellence in Australia, whether in child-centred practitioners, brilliant researchers, or initiatives like ANRAS. North America showed interest in Australia's leadership, such as New South Wales' criminalisation of coercive control, a model being considered in British Columbia. However, no country has an ideal system. Service quality varies widely by location, creating a postcode lottery for children and their caregivers. Children's needs too often come last. So what we need now is a recalibrated system for earlier, tighter responses to family violence, including coercive control. And that's what gives me hope. We have the foundation to do better.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for really reflecting on hope there, because I think those of us that are from that social work background sometimes feel that others might think we're, oh, you're hopeless believers, but it's like, absolutely we are. And acknowledging our trauma in our work is key. So thank you for those beautiful reflections. You've also conducted significant research on the impact of domestic and family violence on children, including your 2022 study with Jennifer Doyle, which was titled Truth Is That the Abuse Never Stopped. Adults' insights on the support they received when they were impacted by childhood domestic and family violence. Robert, could you share some of the key findings from that research and how they relate to children's experiences today?
Thanks, Delia. Let me answer that in 4 parts. Firstly, the findings dispel the myth that coercive control only occurs between partners. It was also directed towards children, with 79% of survey respondents reporting experiences of psychological abuse during childhood. And although only 1 respondent used the term coercive control, their stories vividly illustrated a defining feature of this abuse: the difficulty victims face in describing it and convincing others of its presence. Respondents shared various coercive and controlling behaviours they endured as children, such as parents denying abuse when disclosed, blaming the child for the abusive behaviour, isolating them from their friends and family, humiliating, shaming and undermining their self-worth, gaslighting to distort reality, withholding food, clothing, or medical care as punishment. Many describe walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the abuser or learning how not to poke the bear. A common theme was either being threatened or blamed for the situation, or often both. Secondly, this is consistent with other research. Emma Katz conducted a fantastic study on how domestic violence perpetrators can use coercive control against their children even after separating from their ex-partners. The study highlights that children can be direct victim survivors of coercive control and experience in ways similar to adults, feeling confused, unsafe, and afraid. Children described witnessing performances of what Katz called admirable fathering, where perpetrators manipulated situations to appear caring or responsible while continuing their controlling behaviours in private. And Emma's kindly agreed for this article to be included in the resources for today's session. I've also shared her Substack, which is incredibly insightful and well worth subscribing to if you haven't already. Thirdly, our research shows that it is a myth that children can automatically overcome the negative effects of coercive control and domestic and family violence. Evidence demonstrates that this abuse can have significant psychological, physical, and emotional impacts, many of which persist into adulthood. Respondents shared what they wanted, but often didn't receive, as support at all levels. Understanding and action from the people around them, including family, teachers, and community members, as well as access to mental health services, both during the experience of family violence and in its aftermath. And this underscores the need for a holistic, responsive approach to supporting children and addressing their individual needs. Fourthly, let's consider the implications for workplaces. If we have 688 people in this room, research tells us that 2 out of 5, or 275, have been exposed to domestic violence in some way during their childhood. And this number is likely higher in our industry because many people enter this field for deeply personal reasons related to their own experiences. And this shows that every university, every organisation, big or small, public or private or not-for-profit, has employees who've been harmed by domestic violence in childhood. This is a powerful call for action for organisations to respond. And if we apply the be a lamp for ourselves principle, we should start by ensuring that our own workplaces are safe for victim survivors. How do we create environments where people feel supported and safe to heal and thrive? The key action we can take is to reflect and recognise the environments that we're working in and how we can enhance them starting today. First, reflect on yourself. Where can you continue to grow and develop? Your personal growth is the foundation for creating positive change. Second, recognise the importance of enriching your own work environment. Think of the Rat Park study. How can you create a space where you feel safe and supported and resourceful? When you thrive, that energy ripples out to your colleagues, the people you work with, and the families you support. And third, look at the broader environment, your agency, your teams, and most importantly, the families you work with. Embedding frameworks like Safe and Together across the organisation is critical. This unique framework places children living with family violence at the heart of responses, ensuring they and those supporting them can heal and thrive. So to reiterate, what we need to do is to reflect, recognise, and take action starting today. And if you're interested in the Rat Park experiment, I've shared a link to a fantastic illustrated website in the resources for today.
I can't wait to get hold of those resources. Thank you, Robert. And I think that reflective piece is so key. So thank you so much. And obviously Emma Katz's work, highly, highly recommend as well. We've got 1 minute. Did anyone on the panel want to just maybe add something before we move to our next questions around the additional insights or comments on the challenges faced by children and young people exposed to domestic and family violence and coercive control. And if anyone wanted to add, but we'll keep cracking if not. Brilliant. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Robert. That was wonderful. So, moving on to our next questions. So let's turn our attention to the challenges faced by practitioners in engaging with children and young people in domestic and family violence contexts. Mary Jo, in your experience, what are some of the barriers that children and young people face in speaking out about domestic and family violence and coercive control? Thank you, Mary Jo.
Thanks, Delia. So before I answer that question, I also want to anchor myself on this sacred and ancient land that I'm zooming in from you on. It's the land of the Wongal people, the people of the West, and to recognise this is unceded land. And to honour Robert and how Robert opened up this conversation with his story. Thank you, Robert. A great act of wisdom and courage that we can all learn from. And kind of then connects to the barriers. I want to start wider, then come into the personal. So for me, the moment that a human being is born, even before they can talk or have rational thought, they already get messages about their worth and about how they're going to be heard. And so when the moment you're born colonized or genderized as a girl or racialized as black or brown skin or postcode, and Robert talked about postcode, immediately you're already less than. And the values of your words, have already been constructed. Start to add to that as you grow and develop as a child, the heteronormative messages that children are given and the ableist messages children are given. And so there's a right way to be a child, and therefore there's the wrong way, and with the wrong way to be a child, there's value placed on you and how you speak and how your experiences are heard. That's even before you're subjected to violence. Then if we think about the insidious nature of violence and coercive control and how it does leave that message. When Robert talked about walking on eggshells, I remember a young boy said to me, it's like walking on the full egg. And so think of that explosion as well as the eggshells and that mess. And then think about how that the actual yolk of the egg gets absorbed into the self, and that sense of internalized oppression, which then we hear ridiculous statements in our profession like these women choose, violent men, etc., as opposed to, wait a minute, this is about the force of internalized oppression, and there's one person only responsible for that. So when I think of how do you speak out when society says you're less than? How do you speak out when you are given those very clear messages of the egg exploding beneath you? And yet, alongside those barriers, and I will take the terminology from a political writer, Scott, who talks about the hidden transcripts of those of us who've been oppressed and colonized, and they're there, but we keep them safe until it's such time that we can speak out, that Robert could speak out today, this morning, in a safer place. So yes, there are barriers, and there's also this wonderful choice of survivors to say, and I will hold my counsel until such time.
Mary, my goodness me, and you're right about society and what we already live in those systems and structures that are already conditioning to some extent. So yes, it is about responsibility. Thank you so much. Ruben, I want to apologise for getting your country name wrong. Uwinyana, I hope, and I apologise if I have said that wrong. I hope that you might correct me next. We'll move on to a question for you. It's clear that there's numerous layers of complexity when it comes to encouraging children to share their experiences. So let's now maybe focus on the role of cultural factors. Ruben, how might culture, including those with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, multicultural communities, and refugee backgrounds influence a child's ability to express their experiences of violence? Welcome, Ruben.
Thanks so much for this question, Delia. And no stress as to the pronunciation before. It's kind that you tried. Um, I also just want to position myself, as Mary Jo has, as a Pakenham man, an Indigenous person on this beautiful unceded country, Moonina country, which exists on this beautiful island of Lutruwita, Tasmania, and pay my respects to our First Nations communities nationwide, and also our collective strengths, wisdoms, knowledges, and traditions. And also pay my respect to the three of you who have just spoken before me so wonderfully, and your collective strength and wisdom really resonating with me. And I feel so lucky and privileged to be on this panel today. So I guess I just want to state before I start sharing my thoughts that in no way am I sharing answers, I guess, to working with people from diverse backgrounds, but merely insight into the knowledges we might approach such work with. Considering in so-called Australia, we can see a large deficit focus around many Black, refugee, and culturally and linguistically diverse groups, I wanted to actually take this question and reaffirm it through a strengths-based lens, which is why I really love this question so much. We know that kids who come from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, multicultural communities, and refugee backgrounds are far more common to have their childhood surrounded by exactly that community. And in truth, we know it takes a village to raise a child. The Western notion of individualism, especially in families, is not well suited to the best interests of our children and their development. So when we have a community, and when that community is filled with things such as love, trust, respect, and reciprocity, as is commonplace in Indigenous communities globally, our young people naturally feel safer to confide in their community leaders, to express themselves and their experiences, and to disclose if anything harmful has happened to them. I also think that humility is a really important trait within this sector. So I do just want to be clear that as a Black man, I can only cover a small slither of this question with a limited perspective. You know, I am cautious of doing such a beautiful question such as this any injustice, but I do really just want to reiterate that regardless of cultural nuance and how this might be seen as something difficult to grapple with for people working within these spaces who exist outside of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, that really we have to focus on community capacity building from a grassroots level rather than imposing Western and colonial procedures of practice and engagement, and ultimately reaffirm our commitment to decolonising our collective ways of knowing, being, and doing within contemporary Australian society and culture more broadly. Because really what we all want to do is create a world for our young people where it's safer to express their experiences of violence. Thank you, Delia.
So much there, Ruben, and thank you so much for that honesty and humility that you expressed in that answer, particularly around the decolonising of practice, which, I mean, I even reflect as a CEO of a peak body that we're trying to really think about how we decolonise our responses, and the fact that we're in this system and structure and this fast pace, what have you, and that critical thinking is key. And thank you for expressing such love and trust within those answers around how we want to be raising children and young people. Thank you, Ruben. So another important element to consider is the fear or loyalty to a parent or a caregiver, which can happen throughout cases of coercive control. I'm going to move to Tim and Robert, and Tim first, but can you share your thoughts, Tim, on how these dynamics might silence children, and how can we as practitioners support children in these difficult situations?
Excellent. Thanks, Delia, and thanks everyone for an amazing conversation. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, but I also want to pay respects to the Ngunnawal community in Canberra, where I was raised, and the amazing insights that I've learned from community there. And thanks, Ruben, for your reflections too. Also, I want to do what some of our partners do, Aboriginal partners do, in acknowledging children and young people within whom culture lives and grows. I wanted to, before answering the question, Dilly, just want to make a point I think that's important for today, which obviously is about amplifying children and young people's voices. I think sometimes we shorthand child-centered practice to listening to kids, when really what we're wanting to do is to create environments where we can truly listen to kids, to find out what they want and need and how they would like to be supported. Sometimes that does occur within a dialogue where a child speaks and the adult listens and hears and responds. But often kids tell us that they will communicate in ways that are non-verbal. You know, that children will act in particular ways, that they'll respond to people and places and situations in ways that they want adults to notice. So when kids, children, young people talk about this notion of listening and responding to what children and young people want and need, sometimes it's not a verbal thing. And I think that's particularly important when we're thinking about coercive control and family violence, because children and young people often tell us that from a very early age, they're taught that it's actually dangerous for them to be talking about these things, or otherwise that adults won't respond in a way that's going to make things better for them and their families. So when we're thinking about those notions of, you know, loyalty and fear, we need to understand it from the child's point of view, that actually kids, when we ask them some of the reasons why they don't raise their concerns, often it's because they are fearful that things will get worse as a result. Fear of child protection involvement, fear of police getting involved, fears of repercussions from a violent parent or other family member. So it's about saying, okay, how do we create a space where it's safe for children and young people to raise these things, but more importantly, how can we flip the conversation to something that the children may feel comfortable talking about? Young people who've been through experience of family violence have given us the tip that rather than talking about what happened or what's happening for them, talk about what do we need and what would make life better for you and your family. So that takes away some of the concerns about loyalty, because children and young people are often incredibly fiercely loyal, both to their families broadly, but also to those who are using violence. So if we flip the conversation and don't ask them to put them in a situation where they feel like they're judging or casting aspersions on their families, that things would be better. But I think it is important for us to be really clear about, you know, what's going on for that child or young person. And although I think, again, when we talk about children's voices, we think about a single encounter, you know, where I was sitting down and doing a case assessment or what have you. Children and young people tell us that's not safe. It's about having a longer conversation, about having interactions, about watching, listening and hearing, and asking for tidbits of information from a child or young person in a safe kind of way. Central to all this, and I'll be quiet in 2 seconds, Delia, is about building that sense of trust. And as part of that, I think it's about really setting up some clear expectations about your role and your obligations. What are you going to do with this information? But send the message to the kids that they're not to monitor or control, but to ask, what can I do for you? You know, children, young people often tell us that if an adult comes to them and says, look, I'm really worried about you. I'm worried about your mum. I'm worried about your family. I want to do something, so help me know what I can best do. They're much more likely to engage in that conversation rather than what's happened to you and what are all the problems and mistakes that have occurred within your family.
Also a really important theme throughout this discussion, which I think is key, that meaningful engagement. What does it actually mean end to end? Thank you so much. Robert, same question. Can you share your thoughts on how these dynamics might silence children and how we as practitioners can support children in these difficult situations? Is there anything you want to add to what Tim said?
Yeah, thank you, Delia. Look, building on Tim's excellent points, I'd add that children's concern about making things worse can extend beyond themselves to siblings still living with the parent using violence, or even family pets previously subject to threats. Safe caregivers, including care experienced ones, may also fear child removal or face mother blaming if domestic violence is disclosed. And I think that this highlights the importance of considering children within their broad relational context rather than viewing them in isolation. In practice, this means concurrent safety planning for both the child and their caregiver, ensuring a coordinated and a protective approach. An all-of-family approach can be especially helpful here. And this involves working with the child, the safe parent, and the parent using harm, though not necessarily together. The goal is to address the safety and the well-being and accountability of all family members through tailored interventions. Margaret Cortez, Kathy Humphreys, and Sue Hewitt-Bell have published a masterful summary of the evidence supporting all-of-family approaches to children experiencing coercive control and domestic violence. And I've shared that reference in the webinar resources. It's a fantastic read.
Thank you, Robert. Lots of reading for us, which I think will be essential bedtime reads, everyone, or maybe not bedtime, but essential reading. And thanks for acknowledging the PET risk. I know that's come up through a lot of kind of practitioner work, and there's some really great organisations doing work in that space at the moment. The Lucy's project might be worth a Google, everyone. And safety, absolutely essential to why we're all here today. Thank you. So moving on to a slightly different area of today's discussion, which is around prevention through education. So shifting to a more preventative approach, one of the key strategies for preventing future family and domestic violence is education on healthy relationships. Ruben Sheriff, who we've met from NAPCAN, is with us today. As we know, we've met him and heard him already, which has been fantastic. And Ruben sits on the National Advisory Panel for NAPCAN, Speak Out. Could you talk a bit, Ruben, about your role within that and how this initiative has really helped amplify the voices in children and young people and what that looks like? Thank you, Ruben.
Yeah, thanks so much, Delia. So as was stated earlier, yeah, my name's Ruben and I'm a National Youth Advisor with NAPCAN, the National Association for Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. And one of, I guess, the major pivots that NAPCAN has initiated in the last few years has really been to go above and beyond the status quo of merely recognizing young people and our diverse experiences towards actually embedding us and our unique viewpoints within the organization and the work of the organization. This is not only in regard to our internal work and operations, but also really to all of the work that we undertake more broadly within the sector and within this space. So, as I said before, I'm a National Youth Advisor with one of NAPCAN's working teams. Our team is named NISO, which is an acronym for NAPCAN's Youth Speak Out, and I've been employed in this role for almost 2 years. And I guess really one of the core tenets of the role and our working team within itself is to amplify the voices of children and young people, as you've asked, Delia. So the way we do this is we exist as a team of around 20 young people, and basically we provide our knowledges and consultory opinions, which I guess you could consider our service, so to speak, to many internal programs within NAPCAN and to various external stakeholders. At present, we consult with NAPCAN as to their child-safe ways of working, their policy statements, internal documents such as strategic plans, and then the largest focus of our work is consulting with the team behind Love Bites, our nationally commended respectful relationships education program. And so we review this content in collaboration with NAPCAN's Love Bite trainers and consent educators, which I look forward to speaking more about in a second. I acknowledge that it might be a bit of a shock to hear that young people are so heavily involved and so legitimately embedded within an organization such as this, as we are with NAPCAN. And to some, it could seem risky, but really we consider it to be a no-brainer to involve the people impacted by your work into shaping how it's designed and implemented. With us 20 or so young folk being recognized by a leading organization in this space as legitimate change makers who are experts by experience, not only are we empowered, but we're really given the platform to do exactly what this question is asking about. We're given a platform to amplify the voices of children and young people in contemporary Australian society. So it really comes back to that whole adage, I think, of nothing about us without us. And I think that through NISO, through my working team, with my incredible friends and colleagues in mind, we really do take every chance to advocate for the youth voice and are given such a superb opportunity by NAPCAN to do that through our work.
Incredible, Ruben, and inspiring. I think it's a non-negotiable, actually, and it shouldn't be a shock to us because it should be how it should be wise practice, hey? So that's terrific. So to prevent future domestic and family violence, we know education is critical, along with lots of other preventative approaches and healthy relationships. Can you, Ruben, tell us, like you just mentioned you would, a bit about the Love Bites program and its role in shaping young people's understanding of healthy relationships?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question again. I'm always super keen to talk about Love Bites. So Love Bites is an educational program focused on respectful relationships, consent, and sex, with the program being rolled out to young people aged between 11 and 17. Really, through the program, we aim to just foster an environment where young people feel supported to learn collaboratively, to problem solve effectively, and to communicate effectively, but also really learn the basis of a critical thinking mindset, which we know within social work is something so important. To that last point, the critical thinking aspect, it's really what we're honing on here. in the program, so to speak. But as a program, we with Love Bites, we shift from the notion of an outsider coming in and simply training a class of students to only go and leave 3 hours later. And we actually train facilitators who will then go on to deliver Love Bites in their own communities in which they're already known. So in this sense, I guess you could say we focus on a community practice approach and really recognize the importance of building the capacity of a community, as I mentioned before, when it comes to conversations and attitudes surrounding respectful relationships. We as an organization are very much of the belief that in providing, these safe spaces for people to think critically and to problem solve, and that in planting those small seeds, so to speak, that this is really such a win because it allows these concepts to grow and to blossom within the minds of young people, but also within communities more broadly. So through Love Bites, we've trained over 4,000 people nationally and have thousands of volunteers annually. Just in New South Wales alone, it's estimated that well over 10,000 young people receive our program, though we actually estimate that this is an underestimate, considering we focus on a model of community capacity building rather than individual service delivery. So really, the reach is quite large and it's left in the hands of our passionate community facilitators who we train. But ultimately, and I guess to close, one of the main objectives of Love Bites is to equip young people with the tools they need to build respectful, healthy relationships. That's what it's all about. It's not about coming in with the answers and ostracizing people who might not be there yet and who might not yet have been able to grapple with some of these concepts. It's really all about creating those safe environments, as I said, and prompting young people to think and reflect on their values and the solutions themselves. It's really about facilitating discussion, I guess you could say, and about giving young people the knowledge, skills, and confidence they need to engage in that critical thinking and assess what's right for them and their relationships so that we can, ensure a future free from violence, abuse, and disrespect.
Thank you, Ruben. That's amazing. And I think that critical mindset's key, and particularly the sustainability of the program, I think is key around that community model. And I know certainly here in New South Wales, we did actually have the New South Wales government to its first prevention strategy. And I'm sure Love Bites will be featured within that over the next 4 years because there's been some funding announced. So it's really key that we're doing more of that work across Australia and obviously across this state. So in your experience, Ruben, what can practitioners do to better support young people's voices and choices, especially when dealing with family violence situations? And do you have any key messages for practitioners to ensure they're practicing in culturally safe ways? And I think you've spoken to some of this, but it'd be great if you've got any further insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Delia. This question, I genuinely feel as though I could talk about for the entire length of the webinar, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and hold that for now and just keep to the point. But I think in circling around questions such as these, we really have to come back to the core principles that underpin our entire training as social workers and as practitioners within this space. I'm of the belief that, and this is represented in my own framework, that a strengths-based approach can be really transformative, especially for young people, and even more so for young people who have lived experiences largely focused on their perceived deficits, right? Within this perspective, unconditional positive regard for our service users, for our young people especially, is so critically important, especially when we consider the current social and media contexts that we as young people exist in. Sometimes we as practitioners can become disillusioned by our work, and sometimes it can feel frustrating and as though things are never going to change. But we have to continue to push for a nationwide shift towards a better perception and attitude towards young people and the diverse issues that we face. As you, Delia, and Robert, you've said before, we social workers are, in this realm, the holders of such radical hope, and we cannot lose that. That is so critical to hold close in all of the work that we do. This is especially relevant for young people and their autonomy, particularly in situations of family violence, as you said, Delia, wherein young people may feel reluctant to be open and vulnerable. We have to meet young people where they're at and display unconditional positive relief and, I guess, belief in them, their accounts and their capabilities. I guess to say meeting a young person where they're at and removing all possible barriers and biases for you to do that is always going to be best practice for a young person. And in saying that is also going to always be the best form of a culturally safe practice in doing so. I think also this speaks more broadly to a decolonized approach to social work, really focusing on those core principles of relationship building and kind of giving bureaucracy and neoliberalism a little bit of a toss, if I might add there. I did also just want to add, I guess, a final sentiment. I gave a speech at a domestic violence conference a few weeks back to a room full of people over the age of 30. And one of my key messages to them, which I want to reiterate today, was asking them to reflect on who they were as a young person. I think it's so important. We were all young once, and we're so quick to remove our current selves from that young person, even though we're still the same people on the inside. We all have an inner child, as Robert said before, and that's really what I'd want people to take away. We're human too. Just because we're young does not mean that we're totally incapable. Just have a think about who you were as a young person and how you would have wanted to be treated and supported. Think back to that little you and have this be a leading factor in the work that you do. Because really, you owe it to your younger self, but you also owe it to the young people that you work with in all of your contexts. And so, yeah, to close, I think really this internal work, the prompting of such critical reflexivity ultimately leads to best practice for all. And as Robert said, doing the internal reflection and the internal work can really be an incredible beacon for positive change. And I think for me, as I enter my emerging practice within this space, that's really what I hold close and what I'd encourage everyone else to hold close to as a young person.
Thanks, Ruben. I think there were some really key lessons for me there to take a step back, because you get caught up in that busy workload and you're running around, and it's just so key to be reflective and remind ourselves of who we were when we were young, the aspirations, how we felt, how we wanted to be treated. That's so key. And I don't think I've heard unconditional positive regard for a while, which again is also a bit scary. So thank you again for grounding me. And yeah, that was wonderful. So moving on to a slightly different topic now, with Tim, we're going to talk about children and young people's voices and why they matter. And again, I'm sure we're going to unpick that a lot more around what that really truly means. Tim, you've done some critical research in this area, including the study, Slow Down and Listen, Improving Children and Young People's Safety During Periods of Violence, Separation and Remuneration. I can't speak today, so remunication. Thank you. So Tim, can you share the key themes of your research and how they can inform practical strategies to improve children's safety and involvement in these processes? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Delia. I have to say I've got one of the I spend a lot of time with children, people talking about things so important even over the years. With many moments where we sat with a whole lot of sadness, but also I think a great hope to, particularly the research project that you just mentioned, which culminated in a result which was called what they wanted and needed from the family violence and child protection sectors. So I want to pay respect to those young people, but also the young people really have come forward in courage and conviction and shared their insights. And I would encourage all of those of you who have opportunities to have some of those deep conversations to do so. We'll provide some probably high-level findings, but also some high-level recommendations from young people about what that looks like. I suppose that the work we did in South Australian Department of Social Services looking at family violence.
We're losing you slightly, and are
you?
Yeah, it's been a bit cracky. I'm so sorry. I don't know if we can.
I might.
Your reception's breaking up slightly. I don't know if I should move to Mary Jo maybe, and then see if we can swap
and
back.
I'll come back.
Yeah, apologies, Tim. Thank you. Apologies again, everybody. So we're just going to move on to another slot and swap back, but practitioner skills and strategies to amplify voices. So we're still keeping pretty much around that theme, but we're going to turn to strategies that practitioners can use to amplify the voices of children and young people. So this will be pretty much around the strategies and practice. So Dr. Mary Jo McFay, and I'm enjoying saying doctor, sorry to keep embarrassing you. You have decades of experience working with children and families, particularly in trauma-informed practice. And Domestic Violence New South Wales, where I work, we've been really lucky to partner with you recently to develop a pilot training on responding to children and young people experiencing violence. So I'm sure we'll come on to that, but congratulations on earning the doctorate. The trust factor and the title, everyone, was A Conversational Journey with Children and Young People who have attended therapy as a result of experiencing violence, exploitation, abuse, and neglect. Mary Jo, could you share some of the key insights from your study and what lessons we should be taking away from it? Thank you.
Garamila Mayagat, Natalia, for the non-Irish speakers, I've just thank you very much for recognising that achievement, and it very much was a collective achievement. And my name might be on that piece of research, but it couldn't have been for all the incredible children and young people who gave their time and their wisdom, for the incredible support I got from my supervisor, Professor Susan Hewitt-Bell, and everybody in my personal life who supported me, and including the two examiners who got it, because it was a little bit different at times, because Ruben, unfortunately for me, the little Belfast girl isn't very far away. She keeps popping up regularly. She's not in my past. She keeps opening her mouth every so often, and including writing a PhD. So thank you for reminding us all, Ruben, that we are ... whatever age or stage, 6 or 60. Wow, the key insights from my study, there was quite a few of them, but I think I'm just going to focus on what I put into words as a continuum of service delivery that the children and young people who I spoke to experienced. Now, remembering that these children and young people were subjected to violence and coercive control of all forms, and I'm talking about their experiences of professionals. And the continuum, I named it from epistemic harm right through to epistemic privileging, and I did angst over the language because I did want it to be very vivid in the reality. So as I'm speaking, it might cause discomfort to us all. I hope it does cause discomfort, because it certainly causes me discomfort as a practitioner, and that's a good thing. And then also will cause joy, which is also a good thing. But in the discomfort side of it, all of them, 100% of them, spoke about negative experiences and multiple negative experiences. From things like they invalidated my mental health. He compared my assault to being frightened by cockroaches. One young man said some people are really good at being fake, and he was really good at being fake, i.e. the therapist. Another young person said I had to disassociate a lot, Mary Jo, because he was using such big words. A couple of young people talked about being held down, physically held down by male nurses. And they were in these particular institutions because of sexualized violence. That's at the harmful end, and that's just a summary of some of it. And so, Robert, like for yourself as a researcher, it was nowhere near head. It was all heart and spirit for me when I was listening to these stories, and the reality of being the guardian of them, to speak them out. And I think this is the first time I've spoken them out today, to say that we need to be courageous in our discomfort and know that out there in the name of professionalism, as some children and young people are telling us, they are being harmed. Right through, and I'll move through the continuum to the kind of the neutral end of the continuum, was those who talked about being techniqued, you know, and it was they talked about like some of the resources that were used, but they also were very aware of was one young man said, like, it was so obvious he was just putting in the day, you know, and another young person said, you know, and it was just, I was her job. And so that's that middle range of us techniquing our children and young people. Not that there's anything wrong with techniques, as I'm a woman who's done a lot of training in different techniques and I love them, but I'll talk about how we use them to serve, in service of, not to technique. And I do want to finish on the key insights to the point of the continuum, which was privileging our children and young people. Because despite the negative experiences and the harmful experiences those young citizens had, 100% of them still want to connect to us. I find that very, very humbling. And they spoke about things like, the one I loved was saying, "Oh, you need to be professionally, unprofessionally, professional. I love that. And things like a professional friend. They had that gorgeous language around connection. And Ruben, you talked about, positive regard. They use the word like friend, but to make sure that we're professional with it. And when Tim said earlier on about building that sense of trust, I nearly fell off my wee chair here because the fact that the researchers called that trust thing holy sausages. Did that come up like more than once? Holy sausages is a very technical term, folks, for those of you who are listening. And I said it a few times throughout my PhD. And the other S word as well throughout my PhD. What can I say? But they spoke that beautiful language. Things like she made me a part of everything. And this, I mean, a lot of this brought me to tears and swearing at my dining room table when young people said things like, she treated me like I was an actual person, and it just took my breath away. Not when I was sitting in front of them because I had to, hold them because it was their stories, but when I was away writing up, going like, who are we not to treat another person like a person, irregardless of how old they are? It just does my head in after all these years. But that's the hopeful stuff. That's the stuff we talked about, was the hopeful stuff, was connecting, and the sense of connection. 100% correlation. And I know I was very, very nervous when I was looking at the results, thinking, oh no, I have to come up with something fancy and I have to analyze it. It just jumped out at me. I hadn't to do no analyzing. It just was singing to me. Their words were singing. 100% young people judged the effectiveness of intervention with the connection, with the therapeutic relationship. 100%. You see what jumped out at me? Like I didn't have to do the hard work. What can I say? Now I want to move on to another thing, but do you have another question for me? Because it might segue into the other question.
You do, and I just, love the connection piece, and I'm stealing holy sausages from you, and I'll make sure I reference you in any work I do going forward.
The polite version.
Yeah, okay, absolutely. So Mary Jo, the next question was, could you share insights on why it's so important to prioritize the humanity of children and young people? How does this perspective shape the way we respond to the needs of children and young people? And what does it look like in practical terms? And I know you've really flipped up the DV New South Wales pilot and really made practitioners think about this issue.
Oops.
So please take it away.
Oops, I did. I walked towards these beautiful practitioners going, you're not going to get a checklist. Like, you're going to be reawakened to you, who you are, and who the person is sitting in front of you. And so when I kind of start off about the whole social political context of people's lives, does speak to this stuff about how to connect to humanity. I mean, Ruben talked about us need to decolonize our intervention. That decolonizing isn't just about a kind of racial decolonizing. And when we look about us in social work, it's decolonizing the patriarchy out of social work. It's decolonizing the white European out of social work, or any intervention, any connection to. It's decolonizing that scientific paradigm around human suffering. Like, human suffering is ouch. Like, big ouch, And it's okay to have big ouch. And our children are more than their voices. They are their feet stamping, their little fists, curled, their loud voices. As one young person said to me, MJ, I had to jump. They called me MJ by the end of the research, was fabulous. I had to jump on the principal's desk and scream, sir, you're not listening to me. So our children are voices and jumpers and feet stampers in the face of not just their suffering and not being listened to. And so for me, it's not that we shouldn't have our techniques or our policies or our procedures, but that all comes walking with us as practitioners, wherever context you practice with. And it's goddamn white noise, folks. And we have to push, just clear out the white noise. And if we just breathe into that second when we clear out the white noise and trust yourself, but more important, trust the person sitting in front of you, be they 6 or 16, that they know, they have a knowing. We all have knowing, but they have a knowing And our job, and so the practice of our, practitioners' checklist for me is pushing away that white noise and breathing and just seeing that divine being that's in front of us. And then not to worry, just to say hello. I say to all practitioners, all you have to say for the rest of your career is hello. And then listen, truly listen to what comes back. And then you can respond from there. Trust me, your techniques, they're all there for you to grab, so that you that can be of service of you. But if we don't see the whole person, because I was a bit naughty as a researcher, and I did ask closed-ended questions. Tut tut tut. Don't do as I do, or do as I say. I asked every single one of them. Did anybody, any professionals at any point ask you about your culture as an asset to your healing, your gender as an asset to your healing, your sexuality as an asset to your healing, your age, your postcode, all those? 100% said no. 100% said no. Now, darling hearts, I can't see any of you except from the beautiful faces of my co-presenters. But imagine if I stripped all of that out of your life. It just, see what takes my breath away? And you can hear from my voice the passion, because we have to bring that back. So how come NDIS is saying that yoga is not to be not going to be funded? Dance, singing therapy, all of that is not to be funded. So as well as us stripping out our identities from our life, imagine a world with no music, no dance, no color, etc., and we're saying, no, sorry, that's not part of healing our children, young people. So that's how you connect, I think, to the humanity. Push the white noise, see the person, and then you practitioners celebrate your incredible, beautiful, diverse ways of being, and with those that are sitting in front of you. That trust factor, Tim. That trust factor. I'll have a sup of water now, I think.
Beautiful, Mary Jo, and it is so clear. I think the white noise piece is probably the most straightforward for us all to think about when we're going in to sit one-on-one. What does it actually mean to do that genuinely and not be worried about the next appointment or the next timeline or something else that's going on? Thank you for really reminding us and grounding us in that really important practice and that being asset driven. Absolutely. I've got a final question as you drink that water. Thank you for the passion. It's why we're here today and what we need. So what does and sorry, of course I've got banging outside now, everybody. I hope it's not being disruptive, but what impact does coercive control have on children based on your experience, and how can it manifest? And of course, I'm sure it's very individually led. What steps should practitioners take to reflect on their practice to ensure they're responding in a safe and effective way? You've probably spoken to. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Mary Jo?
How naughty you are, because there was 3 questions in that one question, Delia. Because I know you're getting away with it.
You're just pulling a few things here and there.
So just very quickly say about the impact, all of it. Like, do you know what I mean? And that's where we have to see children, young people, and adult survivors as complete beings, because it impacts all ways of who we are. So I just want to say that. And I want to say that impacts continue into adulthood in very insidious ways, and then we punish people as adults and we also punish our young people for showing us their suffering. And there's a kind of a right way, a sanitized way to show your suffering. One of the young people actually said to me when she was in the lockup mental health unit, she said, what was her word? Something like, there's a right way, or good patient, like a good patient, and the good patients get the attention. But those patients who don't say holy sausages, but the other holy S, do you know what I mean? And who show that gorgeous rawness, they don't. So for me, the impacts, that's all of it. And we have to be pretty aware of that. For us as practitioners, and I think all 3 of my beautiful colleagues talked about supervision. Anybody who knows me knows what I'm about to say. Supervision, supervision, supervision. And one more, supervision. I still, 40 years later, love supervision. And I'm not talking about the administrative side of it, as in, have you done your case notes? Probably not, Ms. McVeigh. Have you kept up to date with your reports? No, and my data remediation isn't done either. Oops. Anyway, that's important. However, that incredible safe place where you can have the courage that Robert invited us all into at the very beginning of this, to see the self and the self in the work, and to bring into supervision without no shame, and with someone safe to go, oh my gosh, I opened my mouth to change my feet. Because we all do it, darling hearts. We all open our mouths to change our feet as practitioners, and that's okay. And that's humanity connected to humanity. And if we can have a fabulous supervisor who will allow us to fall. Have you fallen, Mary Jo? Yeah, great. Is it sore? Yes. Painful? Great. Now, and then that's that rising up again, so we can keep looking at our practice. I just love reflective supervision. We're very, very lucky in our profession, because I work with other professions, and my brother's a nurse, and he goes, what? Supervision? You get to talk about your work? I go, I know, and how I feel about it. So we're very, very blessed, and we should really embrace that opportunity. So for all practitioners, run towards supervision with open arms and hearts to a safe supervisor. Is that okay, Delia? Did I answer it?
Great, and I'm so glad you brought supervision up, Mary Jo, because I'm hoping that that'll be something that we can talk to the sector about in the future too, around some of the frameworks we're wanting to build with you. And supervision's key. So thank you so much. And like you say, safe supervision with great practitioners. And it's something I certainly still embrace, even though I'm in this role. It's so key to my development and reflective practice. Tim, we're going to come back to you and give you a go. And I'm going to give your beautiful study the real title and pronounce everything correctly.
Yeah.
I needed my answer. Thank you, Mary Jo. So Tim, I'm just going to mention again that you've done some critical research in the area slow down and listen, improving children and young people's safety during periods of violent separation and reunification. There we go, everyone. It's got to be a day, eh? So Tim, can you share the key themes of your research and how they can inform practical strategies to improve children's safety and involvement in these processes? And fingers crossed on your reception. Thanks, Tim.
Yes, and my apologies about before, but thank you so much again. And it's amazing going after Mary Jo. Children and young people have told us when we've asked them for advice on how we best build connections with them. They said, lighten up, have fun, joke with us. Don't be too serious, but be ready to talk about the tough stuff when we need to. And Mary Jo really exemplifies that, which is lovely. I think with the work that we do, if I look back at all the interviews that we've done with children and young people, I suppose if we did a word map, one of the key words that would pop out most often would be invisible. Children and young people tell us that they, even though their families might come in contact with a whole lot of social workers, with child protection workers, with youth workers, with teachers, with family and friends and what have you, the kids often feel like they're on the side. And when we talk to a group of young people for that study, we got a youth advisory group to really reflect on some of the things that we'd heard. We asked them, why is it that that's the case? And they said, adults don't like to listen or sit with kids who are in pain. They feel that was the reason why adults weren't necessarily always open to having the conversations, and that, other young people like Ruben who we're studying, social work and other helping professions said, no, well, what happens is that there's all this white noise, that as soon as a child or young person says that something's going on, you click into professional mode and think, God, what am I going to have to write down? What am I going to have to keep? Who am I going to have to tell? What am I going to say in supervision, Mary Jo? And you lose that moment with the child or young person. So echoing your reflections, Mary Jo, young people often talk about what we call a true connection, which is a beautiful anagram which Larry Brentro developed in partnership with young people around trust, respect, understanding, and empowerment. The children and young people need to feel as if they've got a connection with someone who is there for them, who's fighting for them, who's not there to fight out all the problems and to make big reports. It's about someone who wants to really sit with them and to look past some of the barriers that kids put up as well, because children and young people were really clear that after a lifetime of being told that it's not safe to talk about these things, or a lifetime of seeing people take what they've said and use it in ways that they believe is not very helpful, that they need actually to understand that this person is there for them and for their family, and will see their strengths and will see opportunities and work with them to do that. They talked about respect as well. interestingly, in a focus group with young people many moons ago when we were unpacking respect. Young people said two things. One, respect is like a boomerang. You need to throw it out before it comes back. Young people were very much of the view that we have to start by engaging children and young people in respectful ways, and then they'll respect us and build that respect through that relationship. The understanding, children and young people, particularly those who've experienced family violence, have said that, they've often they put up this wall and that they need practitioners who really chip away at it because, they're desperate for someone to see. They're desperate for someone to ask the questions, but often don't feel empowered to actually be able to raise these questions. One of the kids in the study in South Australia had said, let me see if I can find the quote, that for the first time, I got very good at hiding myself until I met my psychologist who saw right through me. If someone had asked the questions earlier on, things could have been different. That seeing right through me was so important for these children and young people. They said, we were always taught in our families that we couldn't approach someone and tell them what was going on, but we always had to answer their questions because that's what kids need to do. If adults ask you a question, then you need to respond and respond truthfully. So kids said, please, adults, take the first step. I noticed that things aren't going okay. You seem a bit out of sorts. Things seem a bit tough for you and your family at the moment. What can we do? So to open up those kind of opportunities. And then the last part of the true connection is that empowerment. Children and young people tell us that if you're going to ask them about what you want and what they want and what they need, then we need to both empower them, to give them choices, to say, this is some of the things that we might do. How can we do this together? To ensure that children and young people don't feel like they're sidelined again. Unfortunately, some of the kids that we've talked to have said, adults are fact finders. They come in and ask all these deep, meaningful questions and then they leave again. But we never hear back from them as to what they're doing, and let alone giving us some choice around that. So that true connection is really important. Before talking about some more of the practicalities, I think in the study in South Australia and Western Australia in particular, young people told us that because it was unsafe for them to share some of their needs and wishes, that really the system itself needs to think about voice in a different kind of way. Building on Ruben's work, they really push for what we would call collective participation, where we're learning from and working alongside young people who've experienced coercive control. Some of the young people, were really quite frustrated that after years of research, after years of practitioners working with children and young people, that adults seem to not really know what kids wanted and needed in a situation. They also got frustrated that adults didn't work in collaboration with each other, so that they didn't necessarily have to share their stories time and time again. One young man said, come on, yeah, it's great to have a say, but do you know how many adults have asked me what I needed? Come on, why aren't they talking to each other so I don't have to relive my trauma to tell you something I've shared 1,000 times before? Young people were also really frustrated, I think, that after the conversation had changed somewhat around children and young people's how they're experiencing family and domestic violence, that things hadn't changed at a policy level, and that they felt that children and young people were often invisible at that broad level too. I remember doing an interview with one young person who really saw it as his responsibility to protect his mum, to protect his siblings. He was the one who had been affected significantly, particularly because there was significant trauma in his family, and then the kids were removed and abuse occurred, and this kid was holding the weight of the world on his shoulders for so long. In his interview, he asked me what was happening at the Commonwealth level to support children. I said, we've got this national plan. And he said, oh, can I have a look at it? So the next time we met, I brought this along and he skimmed through it. And he said, there's nothing in here about me except for a program to stop young men who've experienced violence from being adult offenders. There's nothing about children and young people at all. Us who've been hurt, who felt like shit, who protected our mums and siblings, who put ourselves out there and had the shit kicked out of us. There's nothing in here about how you're going to make life better for us or help us now we're out of our shitty childhoods. We're invisible again and only see us as a distraction or a problem. How do you think that makes us feel? So when we think about children and young people's voice, it's not only about in the moment, in the one-on-one interactions we have with children as cases, but also across the system. How do we build lived experience into our work? Young people were very mindful that, young men in particular, was that there weren't many opportunities for them to have their seat at the table and to say, this is what's going on for me. They also felt that when thinking about sharing voices and sharing stories, it was also a collective experience, that many young people found great solace in talking to their peers, in learning from their peers. You know, young people talked about meeting with psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers, and that was really quite empowering, but it was only when they sat with their peers who said, yes, I've been through it. Yes, there's hope. Yes, I've come through the other side, that they started to truly believe that that was the case. I've been through a tough time, but when I signed up for that peer support group, I was, before that, I was thinking my life isn't that bad, until I obviously went to therapy and was like, well, it could have been better. But it was only when I sat down and heard my peer stories that I recognized that actually, yeah, life is tough and I deserve better. So I think, yeah, peer support, it doesn't have to be peer support with people who've gone through it, but people who understand. So when we're thinking about young people's participation, I think it's really important that we have a broad view and go, what are we trying to achieve, and how through this process are we helping kids to feel those true connections, to have trust in others and trust in themselves, to feel respected, understanding and empowerment. I recognise that most of the other stuff that I was going to talk about in terms of the one-on-one work with children and young people has been covered already. But we'll just flag, I suppose, the key part that young people have said to us, that there's no point you asking what we want and need unless you do something with it and unless we see it. If we don't see the change, then it's almost like you've turned your back on us and have let us down again. So children and young people really want and need that feedback loop, not just in terms of their own stories, their own family situations, but in improving the system for children, young people and families more broadly. Delia?
Here, Tim. I'm so with you, and even just thinking about our roles in the peak of AQUA and domestic violence New South Wales, things happen too fast, and certainly trying to decolonise practice is something we're really thinking about at the moment. And I do think that the feedback loop is key, and those collective voices are key. And I remember when the national plan, you know, back in Scott Morrison's day, I remember how fast that felt and how upset the space was. So that was brilliant feedback from that young person. And yeah, really appreciate those beautiful quotes that you shared with us. I'm sure they've resonated really well with everyone. I got really caught up in that, and then I thought, well, what's my next question? So thank you, Tim. I think you've answered all those questions. I just wanted to put out to the panel, did anyone want to add any further insights or experiences based on what Tim's just said as just a last question in this slot?
Can I just jump in and, sorry, just share
Sure.
one last quote that actually is where the paper came from that Greg was actually involved in writing. So a young man had said, I know when I was going through a lot of violence, there was this mentality of you're a child, you don't know well enough. And I think that's really damaging. I would recommend to practitioners that they slow down and listen to what these kids want. As a decision maker, unless you have specifically been in that situation, it doesn't matter how much research you do or how many studies you involve yourself with, you will never be able to get the first-hand experience unless you've been in it for yourself. You can't possibly fathom the fear or the terror or the overwhelmingness of anxiety attacks that sometimes seemingly come out of nowhere. And it's the first-hand experience that qualifies us, regardless how young people are. We are to make the decisions that we feel will benefit us and help people in the future to cope with the situations that we didn't have the support for then. Slow down and listen to what the people who have experienced it have to say.
I think slow down and listen is a key theme for today and for all of us as practitioners. Thank you so much, Tim. That was great to hear all of that research. So I'm going to say, obviously, thank you to every single one of our panelists. That was incredible, and you all provided such beautiful insights and such thoughtful and reflective, passionate insights, I'd like to add. We now have time for the interactive Q&A, which I understand wonderful Greg's going to help me and feed in some questions if you've sent some. This is your chance to ask questions with our expert panel and share your own experiences about engaging children and young people. Greg, did you have any questions? And you might be throwing them in the chat box to me, and I'll have a quick check.
Hi, everyone. I'm not Delia, I'm Greg Ancliffe, and it's come through because I couldn't actually copy the questions over. There was a couple of questions. The first one was around, there's a theme here around immigrant families and refugee families and the experience of coercive control and domestic violence. And if you could talk about, that. There is a question for Ruben around love bites and what's available for what ages. And then we'll do those two first.
I might take the love bites question, Greg. I've seen a few of those questions in the chat asking about resources surrounding love bites for our younger cohorts. So unfortunately, no, there isn't a love bites package for primary school aged children. There's a junior version for years 7 to 8 and then a senior version for years 9 to 11. However, I would really encourage you to check out the NAPCAN website, especially in regards to other resources for community capacity building and those various workshops depending on where you're located, because we do have other resources in regards to how to keep young people safe and education surrounding this topic. And we're just unable to deliver love bites into primary schools. But in saying that, if you're interested in becoming a facilitator, this is all such useful information to enhance our collective knowledge and our common shared language. I do also want to add that if you are interested in attending a facilitatory workshop, which I also saw in the Q&A section, once again, head to our website. I'm not trying to seem like a shameless plug here, but this is just where the resources are available. And there are various training opportunities, to become a facilitator by one of our NAPCAN Love Bites trainers, depending on where you're located. And so even if you aren't in the position to, deliver love bites to primary schools as you'd have hoped, this is still such, amazing information to hold close and to, I guess, share in an age appropriate way with all of the young people in your life.
Thank you, Ruben. Greg, would you repeat that first question? And then I'm going to jump onto the other question that you mentioned about police responses. But Greg, would you just speak to that first question again and see if the panelists would like to answer? Thank you.
People are interested in hearing thoughts on current challenges faced by multicultural families, migrants and refugees, particularly accessing family and domestic violence services, and any suggestions about how we may address those barriers overall.
I can speak broadly to the fact that I guess in the coercive control legislation has a lot of reference groups. So we meet with government, and there is a refugee and migrant reference group that's feeding into government at the moment to make sure that offence is safely practiced and that those organisations overseeing those communities are responding adequately and appropriately. And a big issue that we've seen recently is people on temporary visas and the lack of funding there. So we put forward to the housing minister recently that we really want, actually, we know in Victoria, there's just a small amount of funding in their piloting support for people on temporary visas to actually have the right services and longevity in services. So we've got a report we're going to put out in a few weeks. Check our website, everyone, a bit around that response and what we want to see in terms of funding. And we want to also make sure that we've got specialist practitioners in refugee and migrant community services. And we also want specialist refugee and migrant workers in specialist domestic and family violence services. And those are also two pronged approaches that we've been pushing with government recently. So just recognising that the response, there needs to be an understanding to the nuances in those communities as well, and just making sure practice is prioritising safety. So there's a few pieces of work that's happening there from a DV New South Wales perspective. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that. And quick one as well, we're also being advised by a refugee and migrant advisory committee at the moment on our responses as well, because I definitely think it's been a gap in the space. Mary Jo, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, so you know more about the resources. I'm just thinking for myself, those of you who aren't in specialist positions, but still maybe working with families that have come to Australia through that context, is to remember when you come from a war zone, the state is the oppressive regime, right? Full stop. And no matter how cuddly we may be, and even if we're in an NGO, we still can be seen as part of the state and part of an oppressive regime. So just to be very, very mindful of that. Then when you've come from a context, a colonized context, where the government is part of the oppressive regime, to speak out against family is not just to betray your family, it's to betray your entire culture. And that's a deep political and spiritual wound that you carry, and you have to, and I'm thinking particularly for mums, and how they speak this out, and for children as well, is their choice is some form of cultural and spiritual betrayal. And so when anybody does speak out, if we can just remember what you have to push through to speak out, I think it's pretty significant. Just hold it in our minds, I think would be great.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Additional barriers that must be considered. I've had a question thrown to me around, can you please outline current gaps in police care in domestic and family violence responses and any training that is occurring for the new legislation? Positively, I mean, I've got a lot to say here. I'll try and be brief. DV New South Wales was actually invited to observe the police training, which is, I think, quite a big step forward for the police being transparent. And we did actually get to observe that training. We were reassured. But I think today we're talking a lot about practice and unconscious bias and those types of things and how we are when we connect and respond. So I think a lot of that work needs to be continued with police, but we are definitely working really closely with the police on the issue. And we did do, again, which we made public in weeks, a report on 6 months in, and 70 members of DV New South Wales responded on what they've seen through the offence. And there were some really positive examples of police practice, and there was some not so positive. So it's a real work in practice around a trauma-informed lens. One thing that's really positive that we've been advocating for is we've got 10 women's domestic violence court advocacy services co-located in 10 police stations across the state. And you can betcha the practice and the response has been remarkably different. And we'll be pushing the New South Wales government to make that statewide. It's visionary, we know it costs money, but it's key. So those are just my top levels there. I don't know if there's any other questions coming through. I can't see just yet, Greg.
Not at this stage, but there is going to be new services coming online next year focused on sort of back to the other question around refugee or forced marriages. And that's been funded by the federal government, and they're starting for 16 to 24-year-olds, and that's starting in January, February through the National Immigration Settlement Services. So that's just another service coming online. But there is no other questions at this stage.
Amazing. Thank you, Greg, aka Delia Donovan number 2. So as we come to the end of today's session, I want to really thank everyone for participating, our expert panelists for their insightful contributions, and also to you participating in your engagement is really key. Huge thanks to Greg Antcliffe at Antcliffe Psychology and Consulting Services for coordinating today's session. You were fabulous, Greg, on keeping us going and moving and keeping our structure. So thank you so much. As we look ahead, it's clear that amplifying the voices and more than that, let's face it, from what we've discussed today, of children and young people remains central to conversations about domestic violence and coercive control. And it is a watching brief, everybody. The offence went live on the 1st of July. It's not retrospective, so we need to really think about how that's going to play out. And the legislation won't be reviewed for 3 years. So it's really important that we are hearing about how that's impacting services. So make sure you're keeping ACRA and DV New South Wales posted. The webinar and associated resources will be available on the CCWT website in coming weeks. And finally, I'd like to invite you to attend the Effective Interventions and Coercive Control webinar series in 2025. This is a partnership between CCWT and DCJ, so look out for that event in the next year. There'll be some invitations that will be coming through. Your feedback is really important to us, so please can you scan the QR code on the screen and give us feedback. We'll also be sending this out via email if that's more helpful. On behalf of the panelists, CCWT, I'd love to say a huge thank you to everybody, and yeah, amazing conversations today that I will hold dear, and yeah, thank you again, everybody.